Hello, we're from Group 3, and now we're going to present the topic about employee testing and selection from Chapter 6, as well as about interviewing candidates from Chapter 7. We will first discuss Chapter 6 about employee testing and selection. So, why is employee selection important? Well, after reviewing the applicant's resume, the manager turns to selecting the best candidate for the job. This usually means reducing the applicant pool by using the screening tools such as tests, centers, interviews, and background and reference checks. The aim of employee selection is to achieve person-job fit. This means matching the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other competencies, often called KSACs, that are required for performing the job based on job analysis. With the applicant's KSACs, uh, while person job fit is usually the main consideration, person organization fit is also important too, which means that employees who are good in their job doesn't necessarily be good for their organization. This might be caused by the different culture that an organization has. Selecting the right employee is important for three main reasons. First, employees with the right skills will perform better for you and the company. Employees without these skills or who are aggressive won't perform effectively, and your own performance and the firms will suffer. Second, effective selection is important because it is costly to recruit and hire employees. And the third and the last one is important because inept hiring has legal consequences. Someone can sue an employer for negligent hiring. So, what is negligent hiring? It means hiring employees with criminal records or other problems who then use access to customers' homes or similar opportunities to commit crimes. These are the steps that employers must do to avoid negligent hiring. Firstly, employers must carefully scrutinize information on employment applicants. Then, they need to get a written authorization for reference checks and then check the reference. Then they can save all the records and information about the applicant, reject applicants for false statements or conviction records for offenses related to the job. Then balance the applicant's privacy rights with others need to know. Then take immediate disciplinary action if problem arises. Any test or screening tools has two important characteristics, reliability and validity. Reliability is a selection tool's first requirement and refers to its consistency. A reliable test is one that yields consistent scores when a person takes two alternate forms of the test or when he or she takes the same test on two or more different occasions. For example, if a person scores 90 on a test on a Monday and 130 when retested on Tuesday, you probably wouldn't have much faith in the test. You can measure reliability by administering a test to a group one day, re-administer the test several days later to the same group, and then correlate the first set of scores with the second. This is called test-retest reliability estimates. And where reliability tells you only that the test is measuring something consistently, validity tells you whether the test is measuring what you think it's supposed to be measuring. Test validity answers the question, does this test measure what it's supposed to measure? It refers to the correctness of the inferences that we can make based on the test. For example, if a person A scores on mechanical comprehension test higher than person B, we can be sure that person A possesses more mechanical comprehension than person B. With employee selection tests, validity often refers to evidence that the test is job related. In other words, that performance on the test accurately predicts job performance. A selection test must be valid, since without proof of validity, there is no logical or legally permissible reasons to use it to screen job applicants. These are the several ways to demonstrate the test validity. First one is criterion validity. It involves demonstrating statistically a relationship between scores on a selection procedure and job performance of sample workers. Content validity is a demonstration that the content of a selection procedure is representative of important aspect of performance on the job. And lastly, construct validity means demonstrating that one, a selection procedure measures a construct which is an abstract idea such as moral or honesty, and two, that the construct is important for successful job performance. In this case, in order for a selection test to be useful, you need evidence that scores on the test relate in predictable way to performance out on the job. For example, applicants who score high on mechanical comprehension tests should perform better as engineers. The validation process consists of 5 steps. So the first step is to analyze the job and write job descriptions and job specifications. The aim here is to specify the human traits and skills you believe are required for the job performance. And once you know the predictors, the next step is to decide how to test them. Employers usually base this choice on experience, previous research, and best guesses. They usually don't start with just one test. Instead, they choose several tests and combine them into a test battery. The test battery aims to measure an array of possible predictors such as aggressiveness, extroversion, and numerical ability. However, you should use tests in a manner consistent with equal employment laws and in a manner that is ethical and protects the test taker's privacy. Next, administer the selected test. One option is to administer the test to employees currently on the job. You then compare their test scores with their current performance. This is concurrent validation. Predictive validation is the second and more dependable way to validate a test. Here, you can administer the test to applicants before you hire them. Then hire these applicants using only existing selection techniques, not the results of the new test. After they've been on the job for some time, measure their performance and compare it to their early test scores. You can then determine whether you could have used their performance on the new test to predict their subsequent job performance. Next, step 4 is to relate your test scores and criteria. Here, ascertain if there is a significant relationship between test scores, the predictor, and performance, which is the criterion. Then the last step, step 5, before using the test, you may want to check it by cross-validating. In other words, by again performing steps 3 and 4 on a new sample of employees. At the minimum, revalidate the test periodically. The next one is bias and utility analysis. For bias, employers should ensure that the tests they're using aren't producing any biased decisions. For example, a particular IQ test may provide a valid measure of cognitive ability for middle class whites, but not for some minorities. If the score depends on familiarity with certain aspects of middle class culture. And for utility analysis, this answers the question, does it pay to use the test? It shows the degree to which the use of a selection measure improves the quality of individuals selected over what would have happened if the measure had not been used. For example, if it is going to cost the employer $1,000 per applicant for the test, and hundreds of applicants must be tested, the cost of the test may exceed the benefits derived from hiring a few more capable employees.
Okay, so the next one is validity generalization, which refers to the degree to which evidence of a measure's validity obtained in one situation can be generalized to another situation without further study. And the next, there's test takers' individual rights and test security. Under the APA standard for educational and psychological tests, test takers have the following rights. There are four rights: the right to the confidentiality of test results, the right to informed consent regarding use of these results, the right to expect that only people qualified to interpret the scores will have access to them, or that sufficient information will accompany the scores to ensure their appropriate interpretation. And the last one is the right to expect the test is fair to all. For example, no one taking it should have prior access to the questions or answers. And also that the takers will have the test security. The Federal Privacy Act also gives federal employees the right to inspect their personal files and limits the disclosure of personal information without the employee's consent. And okay, so next part is how do employers use tests at work. So based on research, 41% companies in one survey tested applicants for basic skills defined as the ability to read instructions, write reports, and do arithmetics. And also 67% take job skill tests, 29% require some form of psychological measurement. So why employers testing? So this it will increase work demands and which can affect to more testing. And then the second one is screen out bad or dishonest employees, then also reduce turnover by personality profiling. And the right one here is the sample tests. So it's actually just the employee just to check yes or no based on the statement. Okay, so now let's move to types of tests. So basically there are four types of tests. The first one is test of cognitive abilities. So it is divided by two categories. Intelligence test, which is IQ, are tests of general intellectual abilities. They measure not a single trait but rather a range of abilities including memory, vocabulary, verbal fluency, and numerical ability. And the second one is specific of cognitive abilities. There are also measures of specific mental abilities such as deductive reasoning, verbal comprehension, memory, and numerical ability. And the second type of test is test of motor and physical abilities. You might also want to measure motor abilities such as finger dexterity, manual dexterity, and if hiring pilots, reaction time. It measures the speed and accuracy of simple judgment as well as the speed of finger, hand, and arm movements. Tests of physical abilities may also be required as well. This includes static strength such as lifting weights, dynamic strength such as pull-ups, body coordination such as jumping rope, and stamina. And the third one is measuring personality and interests. Personality tests measure basic aspects of an applicant's personality, such as introversion, stability, and motivation. Industrial psychologists often focus on the big five personality dimensions: extraversion, emotional stability or neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. However, there are some personality tests are projective. The psychologists The psychologist present an ambiguous stimulus and the person reacts. And also two there's another categories in misery personality and interest test, which is self-reported, which applicants fill them out uh, with the form that the employer give. However, there are four caveats. The first one is projective personality tests are particularly hard to interpret. Then personality tests can trigger legal challenges. A panel of distinguished industrial psychologists said using self-report personality tests in selections should be reconsidered due to low validity. And the last one is people can and will fake responses to personality and integrity tests. And also, personality test results do often correlate with job performance. For example, in personality research, conscientiousness has been the most consistent and universal predictor of job performance. And the last one is achievement test. Achievement tests measure what someone has learned. Mostly it is taken in school, such as like what we have learned, like economics, marketing, or human resources. And achievement test also we can find it in at work, such as the Purdue test for machinists, and also it measures applicants' abilities such as swimming. And since we know that the world is increasing rapidly while the development of technology also rising. So now human resource use computerization and online testing. So this is very beneficial since this leaves a smaller pool to undergo the more personal and costly testing and interviewing. And it is also beneficial in improving test validity and may reducing cheating. The example of this online testing is Timken Company uses online assessment of math skills for hourly position applicants.
Hello everyone, now I will talk about the work samples and simulations. So what is a work sample technique? A work sample technique is a method in which employers measure the performance of an employee doing actual job tasks. These actual job tasks are called work samples, and the advantages of a work sample technique it is that it is hard to fake performance as we are measuring if the employee is able to complete the task or not. And secondly, it is the simulation, and these tests are similar to the job itself. So what the employer is doing is will be very similar when he or she has a job. The concept of this technique that it is very time consuming as we're focusing, or it is better to be focused on one individual only. And the second con is that long-term tasks are harder to measure. So tasks that require 2 or 3 or even a month to complete needs more evaluation and more testing. The second one is situational judgment test, in which an employer assesses the candidate's response to a situation in the workplace. So if you look at the example below, the employer receives a situation and they are given usually 5 responses, or it can be a free response. The pros of this that it is less expensive since it's the same test usually done on paper and given to every employee. And the second one, the company sees the response and it checks if it's compatible with the business values. So if the employers like what the employee said, then they can be hired more easily. The cons that usually these judgment tests are not detailed enough, and the candidates are not given enough background information, so it does not fully assess the candidate's potential. Next, we have management assessment centers, in which it is candidates partake in a 2 or 3 day simulation, and they perform tasks such as being in a leaderless group discussion, in which the trainers are gives a group task, and the group must arrive at a decision. It also involves management games where they have to solve problems in the marketplace, and it also oral presentations in which candidates are tested in their speaking and persuasive skills. So the pros of management assessment centers is that you get objective data since it is evaluated by many experts such as the management, the HR team, and even psychologists, and it provides clear feedback to employees, so employees are able to know their strengths and weaknesses. The cons of this assessment center is that it is very costly to produce, and it is also time consuming since you are testing a lot of people and over quite a long period. And the other types of tests include a situation test, in which candidates respond to situations correlated to the job. So this is similar to the work sampling, and it involves a mixture of work sampling and assessment center tests. The pros of this is that the tests correspond to the actual job itself, and the cons that it doesn't test aptitude in depth, so it doesn't test other factors such as emotional intelligence and personality tests. The next one is video-based simulation, in which candidates respond to the video simulations of the job. So as you can see in the picture below, it is a test where they are given visuals. The pros is that the visuals help to explain the question better, and the cons that candidates may experience technical issues such as bad Wi-Fi or computer issues. And the next one is miniature job training evaluation, in which we employers make candidates do tasks before they hire them. So the pros of this is that you are able to test the candidate by with actual skills required. So for example, factory workers are given the chance to produce goods, and the cons that each candidate needs to be involved in individual training, which is an expensive expense for the business. So how do you choose an assessment method? So when companies select an assessment method, they take into 3 factors. They look at the validity, do they have objective data or not, and the adverse impact towards certain demographics, and they look at the cost as well, if it's high to produce or low to produce. And now we'll talk about background investigation check, in which it is a series of procedures a company does to verify a candidate. For example, it involves honesty testing and substance abuse screening. They do this because it is to verify the applicant's information and to see what they have written has no lies or exaggerations. Secondly, it keeps the workplace safe. So companies do not want to hire someone with criminal background because to make the workplace a safe environment to be in. And the third one is because of the law. Some countries like the USA, have a Fair Credit Reporting Act, in which employers must have a screening check to all employees.
To start, there is ways to check a candidate's background. Most employers at least try to verify an applicant's current position and salary with his or her current employer by phone, the applicant's current and previous supervisors, to try to discover more about the person's motivation, technical competence, and ability to work with others. As you can see, there is form of phone reference or reference checking form, which includes candidate's name, reference, company, date of employment, salary, and weakness, strengths in the work field. New trends shaping the human resource is digital and social media. Employers are Googling applicants or checking Facebook and LinkedIn. Especially LinkedIn provides references search for employers that specific candidates can be searched by entering a company name, candidate's name, and the time frame. On the other hand, there is cons that personal information that are not listed in resume, such as ethnic origin and disability, can be disclosed on social media, which may set the stage for possible EEOC claims. Pre-employment information services are other choices. Employment screening services are easy choices. Based on the database, they assess the information about matters such as workers' compensation, credit histories, and conviction and driving records. However, there are reasons to be cautious with such services. In these services, EEO laws apply, which is law prohibiting prospective employees from questioning applicants about the convictions until late in the hiring process. To the second, there's various federal and state laws govern how employers acquire and use applicants' and employees' background information. The criminal background information may be flawed, making the background check more valuable. There are steps to improve the usefulness of the background information. First, it includes on the application form a statement for applicants to sign explicitly authorizing a background and credit check. The second, telephone references tend to produce more candid assessments. Persistent and attentiveness to possible red flags improve results. Compare the application to the resume. Try to ask open-ended questions to get the references to talk more about the candidates. To last, ask the references supplied by the applicant to suggest other references. Followed by the choices, the polygraph and honesty testing is there for another process. The polygraph is a device that measures psychological changes like increased perspiration. The assumption is that such changes reflect changes in the emotional state that accompany lying. Honesty testing are designed to predict job applicants' proneness to dishonesty and other forms of counterproductivity. Most measure attitudes regarding psychologists were initially skeptical about paper and pencil honesty tests. But things like tolerance of others who steal and admission of theft-related activities. Next, there is graphology. Graphology is the use of handwriting analysis to determine the writer's basic personality traits. It does have some resemblance to projective personality test, although graphology's validity is highly suspect. Besides other testings, there are human lie detectors, physical exams or medical exam for any potential medical limitations so that the company can lower the risk of medical limitations in future. And there's substance abuse screening, which is drug screening that is highly emphasized in the United States.
So now, let's move on to Chapter 7, Interviewing Candidates. So now let's talk about the basic types of interviews. And in this chapter, we will focus on selection interview. And we can classify selection interview based on how structured they are, their content, and how companies conduct the interview. So first, there are structured and unstructured interview. In structured interview, interviewers simply follows a set of predetermined questions, and meanwhile, in unstructured interview, the interviewer is using a conversational style interview aimed to pursue candidates' point of interest, maybe such as special traits that will potentially help the firm or maybe the job position. Now let's talk about the interview content. So first, there is situational interview. That is a series of job-related questions that focus on how the candidate will behave in a given situation. Then there's also behavioral interview, a series of job-related questions that focus on how the candidate reacted to actual situations in the past. And the third one is job-related interview. That is a series of job-related questions that focus on relevant past job-related behaviors. And the last one, the most extreme one, is stress interview, which is an interview in which the applicant is made uncomfortable by a series of often rude questions. This technique helps identify hypersensitive applicants and those with low or high stress tolerance. Now let's talk about the ways companies or firms or organizations conduct the interviews. So the first method is to do unstructured sequential interview. So in this method, companies will perform interviews, and the interview, there are maybe more than one. So applicants maybe will go through multiple interviews. They will go to the first interviewer and then they'll continue to the second and the third. And then the three interviewers will gather and they will decide whether they will accept the applicant or not. And then the second one is the structured sequential interview. It's pretty similar to the unstructured sequential interview. However, as it is structured sequential interview, so the question on that interview has been carefully structured. And then there's also panel interview. So this method, a panel, or maybe we can say that it is a group of interviewer. They will interview applicants together, and then they will decide whether they will accept or they will not. And then there's also mass interview, where a lot of applicants are being gathered in a room, and then a panel interview will interview them simultaneously. Then there's also phone interview, and as the name suggests, it's an interview done by phone. Then there's also computer-based interview. And the last one is web-based video interview. And because interviewers are humans too, they sometimes also make errors, and these are the list of errors that commonly occurs during an interview. So the first one is first impression. So first impression really has a huge impact on an interview because people will conclude whether the candidate fit for the job or not just solely based on how firm their handshake were, or maybe how straight he walked and such of those things. Then the second is not clarifying what the job requires. Uh, some interviewers they don't really understand what the job requires, so they have little knowledge about the requirement for the job. And then there's also candidate order or contrast error. So it is an error that it's like when the interviewers they interview some people with poor performance, and then after they interview those people, then there's rather average people, and because uh, those people is those people who perform poorly before this average person, uh, the interviewers they think that this average person scores better than those who those the other applicant, while actually it is not that way. Then there's also non-verbal behavior and impression management. So yes, non-verbal behavior like maybe smiling has a lot of influence, a huge influence on an interview. Then there's also impression management, and some of the example, maybe an example of the impression management is when an applicant they agree to what the interviewers express because they want to appear better, and then the interviewers maybe they will see that the person is good for the job position, while actually it doesn't really mean that way. Then there's also the effect of personal characteristics such as attractiveness, gender, and race, where maybe one of the example is like when there is a white interviewer and he or she encounters white applicants, maybe they will most likely rate that applicant higher than the other applicants who's not white. And yeah, it is simply that way. And then the interviewers also make mistake on interviewing people with disability because most of the time they avoid to talk about the fact that the disabled people may need some assistance or maybe a technology that will enable them to or maybe will help them to do their job when they are accepted when they are accepted to the job. And then interviewers sometimes also make mistake uh, by their own behavior. Maybe an example of this is like when an interviewer asks question about something, and then after hearing how the applicant reacted or responded to that question. They maybe will not, or maybe they will do other signal. Well, well, it is not a huge gestures, but it is actually it's obvious enough for the applicants to see that and to understand that the interviewers agrees to what he or she responded to the question
Hello,
in
my
the
name is
interview.
Adrian, and I will be continuing the presentation. And then my part will be how to design and conduct an effective interview. So, to conduct an effective interview, we can start by designing a structured situational interview. So, structural situational interview is a series of job-relevant questions with predetermined answer that interviewers ask of all applicants for the job. So in this structured situational interview, there is 5 steps. The first one, to analyze the job, is to write a job description with a list of job duties. The second step will be write the job main duties. Say you rate it from 1 to 5 based on how important the job is. And then there is third step, to create interview question. So like create situational, behavioral, and job knowledge interview question for each of the job duties, with more questions for the important duties. And then the fourth step is to create benchmark answer. So for each question, we develop ideal answer. For a good answer, we'll be giving a 5 rating. For the marginal answer, we just give it 2 rating. And then if they have the poor answer, we'll be giving 1 rating answer. And then the last step is to appoint the interview panel and conduct interviews. Okay, so this is the example of profile-oriented interview question. You can see in the screen there is profile components, skill, knowledge, trait, experience, and this is the example of it. And this is the sample interview question. You can read it in the screen. Okay, so the next one will be employee engagement guide for the manager. So building engagement, a total selection program. Many employers create a total selection program aiming to selecting candidates whose totally of attribute best fits the employer's total requirement. The program Toyota Motor used to select employee for auto assembly team job illustrates this one. So the Toyota way. Toyota's hiring process aims to identify such a similar candidate. The process takes about 20 hours and a six phase over several days. And then this is the step of it. So the first one is an in-depth online application. It takes like 20 until 30 minutes. For example, in step 1, applicant complete an application form summarizing their experience and skill, and often view a video describing Toyota's work environment and selection system. And then the step 2, it's take 2.5-hour computer-based assessment. So in step 2, aim to assess the applicant's technical knowledge and potential. And then step 3, 6-8-hour work simulation assessment. So in step 3, applicant engage in simulated realistic production activities in Toyota's assessment center under the observation of Toyota screening expert. And then there's step 4 is a face-to-face interview. Step 5, a background check, drug screen, and medical check. So he probably have a good background, hopefully. And then there's step 6 is the job offer. So after all the interviews, background check, and test, the employer decide to whom to make an offer using one or more approach. And then there is 3 approach: judgmental approach, statistical approach, and then there is hybrid approach. So the judgmental approach subjectively weights all the evidence about the candidate, while the statistical approach quantifies all the evidence and perhaps use a formula to predict job success. And then there is the hybrid approach that combines statistical result with judgment. And then after There is the job offer main parameters. The job offer will include the pay rates, benefit, and then actual job duties. And then after you discuss about these three things, there may be some negotiation between you and the job seeker before reaching an agreement. And then when agreement is reached, the employer will extend a written job offer to the candidate. Okay, that's it for from our group. Thank you very much, and yeah, goodbye.